Here's something that sounds backwards. The richest people you know are often carrying more debt than you are. Not less, more. And it's not because they're bad with money, it's because they understand a line most people never learn to see. The difference between debt that builds your future and debt that quietly drains it. Before we go further, this video is for general education only. It's not financial advice, and it's not a recommendation to borrow money for anything. Think of this as a way to understand how debt actually works, so you can make better decisions with your own situation and your own advisor if you need one. So what actually separates good debt from bad debt? It's not the interest rate alone, and it's not the size of the loan. It comes down to one question. Does this debt buy you an asset that can grow or produce income? Or does it buy you something that loses value the moment you own it? Let's start with the classic example, a mortgage. Say you buy a house for $300,000 with a 20% down payment, so you borrow $240,000 at a 30-year fixed rate of 6.5%. Your monthly payment, principal and interest, comes out to around $1,117. Over 30 years, you'll pay roughly $306,000 in interest. That number sounds brutal on its own. But here's the part people skip. Historically, home prices in the U.S. have appreciated somewhere around 3 to 4% a year on average. Though that varies a lot by market and time period, and there's no guarantee it continues. If that same house appreciates at just 3% a year, in 30 years, it could be worth around $728,000. You paid interest, yes, but you also built equity in an asset that, in this scenario, more than doubled in value while living in it the whole time. That's the profile of good debt. It's attached to something that can appreciate or generate income. The payments are predictable, and the debt is sized so it doesn't crush your monthly budget. Now compare that to bad debt, and the go-to example is a credit card balance. Say you put $5,000 of purchases on a card with a 24% APR, which is close to the national average right now. If you only make minimum payments, roughly 2 to 3% of the balance each month, it can take you over 15 years to pay it off, and you'll pay more than $6,000 in interest on top of the original $5,000. You didn't buy an asset. You bought clothes, dinners, maybe a vacation, things that had value in the moment and then were gone. The debt outlived the thing it paid for. That's the core problem with bad debt. The value disappears immediately, but the payments don't. A car loan sits in a gray area, and it's worth walking through because most people get it wrong in both directions. A car is not an investment. The moment you drive it off the lot, it typically loses 10 to 20% of its value in year one, and by year 5, it might be worth 40 to 60% of what you paid. So structurally, a car loan looks like bad debt. But context matters. If that car is what gets you to a job that pays $50,000 a year, and without it you couldn't work at all, then a reasonable loan on a reliable, modestly priced vehicle is functioning as a tool that protects your income. The debt itself is still depreciating, but what it enables can be worth far more than the interest you pay. The mistake is financing a $45,000 truck on a $40,000 salary because it feels like both good and bad debt live on a spectrum, and intent and sizing matter as much as the category. There's a fourth category worth mentioning because it trips up small business owners and side hustlers constantly: business debt. Say someone borrows $15,000 to buy equipment for a small landscaping business at 9% interest with a monthly payment of around $475 over 3 years. If that equipment lets them take on jobs that generate an extra $2,000 a month in revenue, the loan paid for itself in under 8 months, and everything after that is closer to pure profit. That's good debt doing exactly what it's supposed to do, funding a tool that produces more income than it costs. But the same $15,000 loan taken out to buy a logo redesign in a fancier office nobody needed yet produces nothing measurable, and now there's a $475 payment with no new revenue to cover it. Same loan amount, same rate, opposite outcome, because the test isn't the size of the debt, it's what it's actually funding and whether that funding pays for itself. It's also worth mentioning how you dig out of bad debt once you're already in it. Two strategies show up again and again. The avalanche method has you pay minimums on everything, then throw every extra dollar at whichever balance carries the highest interest rate first, which mathematically saves the most money. The snowball method has you pay off your smallest balance first, regardless of rate, for a quick win, then roll that payment into the next one. It costs a little more in interest, but behavioral research has found people are more likely to stick with a payoff plan when balances disappear quickly, even if it's not the optimal order on paper. Neither method is wrong. The right one is whichever you'll actually follow for the next year or two. Student loans are probably the most misunderstood category of all, so let's do a myth versus reality check. Myth: all student debt is good debt because education always pays off. Reality: it depends heavily on the field, the school cost, and the amount borrowed relative to expected income. Data from the Federal Reserve and Department of Education has repeatedly shown that, on average, bachelor's degree holders earn significantly more over a lifetime than those without one, often cited in the range of $500,000 to over $1 million more across a career, though these are broad averages that vary widely. But borrowing $120,000 for a degree that typically leads to a $38,000 starting salary is a very different math problem than borrowing $20,000 for a degree that leads to a $70,000 job. Same category of debt, completely different outcomes. The lesson isn't all student debt is good or all student debt is bad. It's that you have to look at the ratio between what you're borrowing and what it's realistically going to produce. Here's a second myth worth killing: that having zero debt is always the healthiest financial position. For some people, especially those prone to overspending or without steady income, that might be true, and there's real peace of mind in owing nothing. But if you have $20,000 in a savings account earning close to nothing, and you avoid a 3% fixed rate loan on an appreciating asset because you don't like debt, you may be leaving value on the table. Reality is more nuanced than debt bad, no debt good. It's about what the debt is funding, the rate you're paying, and whether you can comfortably handle the payment even if your income dipped for a few months. So how do you actually apply this line in your own life? Start by listing out anything you currently owe or anything you're considering borrowing for, and ask 3 questions. First, does this purchase have a realistic chance of growing in value or generating income, like a home, a business investment, or education tied to a specific, verified salary increase? Second, is the interest rate reasonable relative to today's rates, meaning something in the mid-single digits rather than 20+%? And third, could you absorb this payment if your income dropped by 20% for 3 months? If a debt fails that third question, it's risky regardless of what it's attached to, because even good debt on paper can become bad debt in practice if it breaks your budget. One more number worth knowing: financial guidelines often reference keeping your total debt payments under roughly 36% of your gross monthly income, sometimes called the debt-to-income ratio, with no more than about 28% going toward housing specifically. These aren't hard rules and lenders vary, but they're a useful gut check. If you add up your mortgage or rent, car payment, student loans, and credit card minimums, and it's eating half your paycheck, that's worth addressing before taking on anything new, no matter how good the new debt looks on paper. Let's bring it back together. Good debt tends to fund something that appreciates or produces income, comes with a manageable, often lower interest rate, and fits comfortably inside your budget even if things get tight. Bad debt usually funds something that loses value immediately, often carries a high interest rate, and can spiral because minimum payments barely touch the balance. And in between, you've got things like car loans and some student loans that depend entirely on the specific numbers: how much you borrowed, what rate you're paying, and what it's actually enabling in your life. The line most people miss isn't about the type of loan. It's about running the actual math before signing anything, instead of relying on a label like mortgage or student loan to tell you whether it's smart. If this helped you look at your own debt differently, subscribe, because next week we're breaking down something just as counterintuitive: what a simple $500 monthly investment can actually turn into over 30 years, and why the first 10 years matter a lot less than you'd think. This video is for general education only and is not financial advice.